Okay, so I'm going to start over with all the jokes. No, sorry. But no, this is where it really, the rubber starts meeting the road. It's one thing to, and I applaud you for getting ahead of the curve and reading the contracts and figuring out, how to start addressing it. But we're going to bump into additional items. And so I wanted to just get a quick list, and please just unmute your mic and or raise your hand and just fire off something that maybe you thought about over the weekend, or a situation that's already arisen, or something you're anticipating having at least a modest challenge with as we embark on day one, well, business day one of the new venture.
I got a
Wow.
question, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead, Kyle. Thank you.
You're welcome. One is I'm going on some showings today. I got two clients coming in, get sit down with them. Then I have a new listing coming on. So the question is, like, as a listing agent, do I request to see or make sure that they have buyer broker sign, or is that just up to them? I don't worry about it. Am I going to have to police that, or is that something that just is going to be business as usual?
So I'm going to give you and honestly, that's a great question. And I've got it a few times. And here's how I answer that. Your fiduciary, first and foremost, is to your seller, right? To do what's in their best interest. So on the one hand, it could be put in the category of net them as much money as possible in a transaction. It could also be making negotiations easier. But you really don't have the fiduciary to make sure that there's a buyer broker in place. Now, having said that, there's a couple of safety nets, right? When I've got, in fact, let me bring this up on screen. It'll be easier to see. Hold on 2 seconds. Yeah, for those that joined late, there's a little humor on the screen. Okay, so I have a cleaner copy. Let me zoom in on this of the proposed changes to the REPC. Okay, and this goes to your question, Kyle. So the red box, obviously, up here just tells you what section it's in, but the section in the red box is what has changed. And the kind of reddish colored highlights are, hey, pay attention to this, right? We should all get very good at this. If no box is checked, right, seller has not agreed to compensate the buyer's brokerage in the REPC. That doesn't mean there can't be something else. But let me just say it this way. Even though there's an ERS, right, in section 2.1 is how much the seller's going to pay the listing brokerage. 2.2 is how much they authorize us to advertise up to if we do a deal. But it's far from agreed with the ERS 2.2 that any or all or whatever amount is actually agreed to. So really the forcing functions are either a brokerage payment agreement document that we covered last week, or putting it into the REPC in this section. Anything shy of that, now I'll throw a third one in. It's not a new document, but could you use escrow instructions? Yeah, escrow instructions is still a valid thing. But in here, it basically makes that point that unless this box is checked, this REPC is doing nothing with compensation. And then notice the green section right below that. Buyer agrees that the seller's payment to the buyer's brokerage does not exceed the amount agreed to between the buyer and the buyer's brokerage in the buyer-broker agreement. So this is where we start to get these questions like you were asking, Kyle. Do I have an obligation, one at a showing level, to make sure there's a buyer's agency agreement? The answer is no. But I would say under our fiduciary of reasonable care, right, that we have the conversation with the buyer because of this section, and in particular, that last highlight, to confirm, hey, contractually, your buyer's saying that you have an agreement. I'm asking you as their representative brokerage, the buyer's brokerage, do you have an agreement? That seems kind of trivial, but I think in the new lay of the land, this is going to be a, what would we call it? An affirmative obligation, not just a, oh, it'd be nice if I knew. right? And by doing that, we head off at the pass a lot of potential issues. I know from doing this 17, 18 years as a principal broker and 23 years as a practitioner in general, that there's just a certain portion of the population that, is it safe to say, kind of errs on the side of laziness. Is that fair to say? Is that rude? I hope it's not rude. I think it's just factual. And it's not adequate for us. If we're representing our client, it's never going to be an adequate answer to be like, well, the other side was lazy. Because if I was your client, I'd be like, yeah, and you're getting paid a big A amount of money when this thing closes. How come you didn't put a call in? How come you didn't verify? How come you didn't? So do you understand what I'm saying, Kyle? Is it a specific requirement of DRE rules? And no, but if you want to have a higher probability of closing, if you want to have a better experience in the transaction, if you want to come off as the pro so that you get repeat and referral business from our clients, then yes, you absolutely will do that. Make sense?
Okay. Yes. And this little section you have highlighted, that's the new REPC?
That is correct. This is the one that I still don't have an update that the AG signed off on it over the weekend, but if he didn't, hopefully it'll get signed off today. That would be great. But yes, this will become part of updated REPC in the very near future.
Okay, does that also include the land REPC? Or they have a new one on that too? I know that one hasn't been updated for a while.
I would assume so, Kyle, but let me double check that, okay?
Okay.
Now, here's the kicker, and I'm glad you brought up the land REPC, because we have a traditional residential REPC, and Don will get to you in 2 seconds. And we do have a land REPC, but what else do we have? A lot of builder REPCs. And there's no forcing function on the builders to make sure this language is incorporated. And I would just venture a guess that they're going to wait a good long time before you start seeing them, if they ever incorporate this language in their purchase agreement. And so we're going to need to get proficient incorporating language by way of an addendum into their agreement so that we are compliant. Okay, Don, thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. Hey, I think I misunderstood Kyle's original question, which made me misunderstand your answer. What was Kyle's original question?
The question was, he's going out, for instance, to do a listing appointment, and he's going to have buyers agents and their corresponding clients that want to see his house. Is it his job to make sure they have a buyer agency in place? The short answer is no. His fiduciary is to his sellers, but then I gave a very much more augmented answer. If you want to avoid frustrations and things like that, we're going to incorporate it as part of a good course of business. So let me paint the other side. Can you imagine Kyle listing for analytical like me, and we get the house cleaned up and they show, and they write an offer, and then we run into an issue about compensation, and my question is going to be, Kyle, how did we get here? Do you not know what you're doing? Right? And by that time, being an analytical, will have done some reading to find out just the bare minimums of what the national settlement is. And dude, you weren't even, what? Were you asleep at the wheel? See what I did there, Kyle? Asleep at the wheel.
Yep. Love it.
Yeah. So yeah, short answer is no, it's not our job to make sure, but as a good business practice, how hard is that going to be as a listing agent to say, hey, Don, super excited that you're going to, or your client wants to see our house. Hey, just so that we don't have to deal with this later, do you already have a buyer broker agreement with them? I don't know. That seems like a pretty easy dialogue. And it also dovetails with.
Why am I fucking asking that?
What's that, Parker?
Sorry, I did not know that I was on speaker. I apologize. I'm driving. Sorry, I'm driving. I have typical road rage. Please forgive me, everybody.
That's
so
okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's not. We don't have to do it. We're going to find ourselves wanting to do it just because we're going to have to address it sooner or later. under our fiduciary of reasonable care. So get it out of the way early. And not only that, guess what the buyer's agent is going to, in most cases, going to ask about with us?
Compensation.
Yeah, how much, is there any cooperative compensation? And if so, how much? And is it appropriate for me to ask them and say, hey, I'm happy to give you that answer while we're asking these questions. Do you have a buyer broker? Right? Now, this is where it gets dicey, right? You're going to have a listing agent and be like, well, how much is in your buyer broker? I think it's fair to say, you know what? Ultimately, when we go under contract, I'll share that with you, but I don't want to ruin negotiating position. You understand, don't you, Kyle?
Absolutely.
Make it easy for them to say yes. Don't do it in a territorial way. I'm not telling you. That's bullcrap, you know. Hey, you know what? I totally get it. You have to do that. And ultimately we'll want to know those things to make sure, but we're still in the negotiation phase. So just like on the listing side, you know, I don't know exactly how much the seller's going to agree to. Let's get those things out of the way first, and then I'll be happy to send you a copy of my buyer broker. Okay. All right. What other questions? That was a good one, Kyle.
Thank you.
Matt, I have a question.
Yes.
Can a person put a range in their buyer broker, say 2.5% to 4%, whatever?
Ooh, I've got that one a few times, and you're going to love my answer. Kinda.
I think
But
we
you
should
rarely
be able
hear,
to, but what's
you
kind of?
rarely hear come out of my mouth. Now listen, let's start with the hard and fast rule that is coming as a part of the settlement. And I don't have all the exact verbiage of the settlement, but I know, you know, what has been communicated. The basic premise of it is the buyer has been harmed in the past. That's part of what this is about. The buyers collectively have been harmed in the past. They have a right to know how much they're going to pay, and they shouldn't be jacked around afterwards and say, oh, it's not 2.5%, it's 3.5%, right? So that's the starting point of your question. And so we need to be clear with them how much they're going to pay. And so you're going to love my little rework on your question. Let me show you something on screen here, if I remember which screen it is on. Here we go. So I went into SkySlope Forms. Now, you guys on your screen are seeing a view that only I have as, what do we call me, Savannah? The Grandmaster, the Grandmaster administrator. But all of these that you see here will be available anytime somebody's doing, for instance, a blank addendum to a REPC, a blank addendum to an ERS. That's why I have put the initials at the front end so you don't put it on the wrong form. But I just created this one this morning, and you guys get to be kind of my guinea pigs as to what you think of the language, whether it would work or not. I mean, it's technically in SkySlope right now, but I can edit it really fast. So the title of it is Exclusive Buyer Broker Agreement Gap Post National Settlement. And here's what it says. Per section 2.1 of the Exclusive Buyer Broker Agreement and Agency Disclosure, company agrees that if buyer acquires a property where the seller and or seller's brokerage offers a cooperative compensation less than the amount specified in this section, meaning 2.1, buyer will only be obligated to pay 2% and $2.95, or this amount minus any cooperative compensation from the seller or the seller's brokerage. So I know it sounds kind of the same. It acts like a range, but the way I'm writing it is, no, you are obligated to pay this, period, right? It starts there. And then it says, oh, but if a situation comes up where they're offering less than what's in here, we will scale down. Do you understand the distinction?
Okay.
And why that's different than saying, oh, I don't know, you'll pay us between 2% and 5% and have them sign off on that. This is putting a hard starting place at the top, and then based on a conditional, which is outlined here, then we can fall back. So technically a range, but said significantly differently. Okay.
So Matt,
Yeah.
Matt, question on that. So in the main body of the document, it would be a higher number. It
Yeah.
would be
So
3%
let's
or
just use a non-standard amount. I put 3% in section 2.1, 295 and 3%.
Okay, so
And
this is the addendum that's kind of puts a floor on it. Says
correct.
we're gonna try to get 3, but worst case, it's 2, baby.
Correct. And I'm trying
Matt,
to, yeah, Daryl,
where did this language come from? I'm sorry, I might have missed what you said about that.
right here, Daryl.
So why don't we use the same line that was in the original buyer broker agreement that said that whatever amount the cooperating broker is willing to pay satisfies the buyer's obligation to pay this amount as long as it isn't less than the amount in the agreement.
Yeah. I think this says it, but like you said the other day in my training, I didn't explain it very good. Or I didn't write it very good. My thought here was I wanted to make sure that we stated, yes, we are charging 3%, right? But in the situation where it's less, here's what we will accept. And I think we're saying kind of the same thing. And Daryl, I'm happy to rework this word-wise, but just conceptually is like, yes, if it comes at 2.5, we will accept that, right? As long as it doesn't go below 2% and 2.95.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So Matt, sorry, is this document essentially saying, I'm just trying to wrap this around my brain. Sorry, everybody. Let's say the BAC, or sorry, the BBC being offered is 2.5%. And I have on my broker 3%. At what point do I introduce this? Because I'm expecting to collect 3% at the time of closing.
Yeah. So again, this is kind of what I was saying in our trainings. I'm not trying to tell you on any number of these issues that this is the way. What we're trying to give you is several ways to adjust to your particular business. So Parker, if you want to insist that your buyer pays 3%, that's not a negative. You guys provide a lot of value. I totally get it. Then really no need for this. But if I'm one of your prospects, not a client yet, and I raise the issue, I'm like, that's cool, Parker, love to work with you and the Logan Moffett team, but I'm kind of an analytical dude. And what if the seller only offers 2% or 2.25 or 2.5? What's your answer going to be at that point? Hopefully, you now have this in your quiver at the ready, and you can say, you know what, we actually anticipated this. And, you know, we do run a business, so we have certain costs and there's a floor we can't go below, but I can do it so that if there's a cooperative compensation of 3%, you're covered. You're not coming with money out of pocket. But if it goes anywhere between 2% and 3%, you're still covered. And I've got language to cover that. So you can rest easy, Mr. Buyer.
And this form is optional. This isn't
even a form. This is a clause that you can drop into a blank addendum.
Got it.
Okay.
Matt,
I hope you guys understand that really is our approach. We're truly not trying to dictate a particular way, because we'll fail, because there's a lot of different scenarios. We're trying to give you and make you understand when certain solutions you can use in certain circumstances. Go ahead, Andy.
the only just some based on what Parker just said, based on the way that you've written it, it kind of sounds like if it was 3% on your buyer broker and you have this addendum attached and they offer 2.5, it sounds like we're just going straight to 2 and not that 2.5. So I don't know how to reword that, but it sounds like if it's less than that, then we're automatically just going to go to 2.
Yeah, and I think that's Daryl's point. And I literally wrote this about 5 minutes before jumping on this call. I just wanted to use it as a discussion point. So yeah, we will take, it's very good points. This is why we get on a group call, and we will make sure that it has the language, whatever they're offering, unless it drops below 2%, same verbiage. Okay, awesome.
We keep them separate.
And by the way, you can see some of the other things that I have in here. If you ever have a suggestion of things that you use repetitively, or you wish that a particular document that we use had some different language that you tend to addend, and you want to make sure that it's on, solid language, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, and we'll see about creating a clause. And yes, we will run it through the appropriate filtering mechanism so guys like Daryl and you and others can, chime in and make sure we have crisp language. Okay. All right. What other situations, questions that those cannot be the only ones? I find that hard to believe. Other situations you've anticipated.
Hey, Matt, let's take this from like basic scenario, right? What does a buyer's agent say to a buyer? Right?
Okay.
First meeting, what does the buyer say to the buyer to introduce this? Just I'm just curious to know what everybody else is saying or formulating.
Yeah.
And then the next step is, how do we expect that communication from the buyer's agent to the seller's agent and vice versa? And then that continued communication on from that
Wow.
point between
Wow.
both parties.
Slow the roll, Parker. You just covered like 10 miles. So let's start with this. Dealing with a buyer or a seller, there's two basic scenarios. Are they currently in place, or are you trying to get them in place? If they're currently in place, so for instance, Stephanie Sears called me this morning like, hey, I'm going out to meet one of my sellers. We do have a listing. It's not under contract, but I want protection of the addendum. How do you suggest I bring this up with them? Well, how do you guys suggest we bring it up with them? I don't mean the exact verbiage, but what's your general approach? I hope it's something incorporating, hey, I know you're probably aware of some changes that have gone on nationally because of the DOJ and the real estate industry. The good news is, I think it's always good to use terms like that. The good news is not much has changed in Utah. What does that do just by saying that? Dan, how do you feel if I tell you the good news is nothing significant has really changed?
Well, yeah, I mean, change creates anxiety, right? And so we don't unfud, right, as you would say, right? Like, we don't know how this is exactly going to play out. But if we tell people like the national settlement is really, like, in my opinion, for like 30 states in the country that didn't do this correctly, and the rest of us, we've been doing this for decades, so we're going to be able to know how to navigate this. So that's what I would.
I love it, because all of a sudden through your dialogue, you're kind of indirectly putting yourself and us as practitioners in the state of Utah kind of on a pedestal. It's great that California and other states are finally catching up to the way we've been doing it for 2 decades in Utah. Isn't that hilarious? You know what I mean? Just take the edge off of it, but also be honest. But I'm not here to tell you nothing has changed. And my point in going over this addendum, which will take us all 5 minutes, is just to point out the slight subtleties that have changed. But substantially, it really hasn't changed. Am I being honest at that point? As opposed to other times? Yes. So 1, you take the edge off. 2, you tell them a roadmap, and you're going to get through it in a short order of time, and it's a nothing burger, right? There's just not a lot to it. And you make it very easy for them to then say, yeah, okay, cool. Now, you may want to go the additional step. It's entirely up to you, because you're going to leave them a copy, right? Anytime we have them sign something, we give them a copy of their signed copy, whether electronically or in person. And I'm going to take that. I don't know if you guys still have your doc set from training with the green highlights, and it's easy because you are directed to the important points, and be like, you know what? So this is the way I'd handle it, Parker. And I'm talking only about the ERS right now. In the past, we had one section called brokerage fee, and there were components in there, but it wasn't clear enough to the public. So the national settlement has really broken it out into 3 components. The first one is, how much are you going to be paying our brokerage, the listing brokerage, if we get your home sold for you? Pretty straightforward. The second one is, how much are you authorizing the company to tell the buyer's agents out there if there's a cooperative compensation, and depending on the offer, and that is a little bit of a change because you are now in a better position, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, because of this language. Depending on the offer, how much compensation are you offering? Am I good so far? Have I correctly portrayed it? Yeah. And 2.3 is simply like, and if you do sign a REPC, so that REPC is going to be very important, and you know I'm going to take care of you. I'm not going to let you sign that until these things are all negotiated and worked out. But once that REPC is signed, as long as it doesn't exceed the amount that's in here, so that's good for you. You know what the high and the low is, and as long as it's within that frame, and you sign a REPC, then yes, that portion will be added to the total compensation that is being paid. That's it. And I would literally say it that way. That's it. Those are the changes.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
I'm just going to assume that everybody's a little nervous about going into their first buyer agent meeting. So maybe what we can do is say, I would tell people it's a lot more important than it used to be that we actually have a little chat to explain the agency relationship in the state of Utah, because a lot of people are aware of it. A lot of people don't have a clue. So maybe you just pick out the forms that you're going to use and go through those forms with people, and those forms are going to kind of keep you on track on how you explain it. And guys, this is going to take some time to get proficient and comfortable at saying the right things again. And that, I think, what Dan is going to follow up with on his Committed to Your Success training in the next several weeks. And yes, excellent.
Starting tomorrow.
It's starting tomorrow. So join that class, and this conversation can go into to a lot more depth about conversation and scripts and so on. In addition to that, Brian Buffini is offering what's called a Certified Full Service Professional Designation. And he has a new buyer agency presentation and a new listing presentation, which we're going to study and maybe incorporate with Dan's training as time goes on.
Yeah, listen, the great news about our company is there's never a shortage of resources to help you. The trick is finding your way to the calendar. And I know that's super hard, difficult, but then selecting which ones you actually want to leverage. And Dan and Daryl have done a great job of the Committed to Your Success curriculum. And yes, it's a living training. There will be stuff added all along the way. Now,
and as an added bonus, Ashley is going to be participating in. Is that correct, Dan?
Ashley Wolthuis?
Uh-huh.
Absolutely, yes.
So that it's going to be even better.
Yeah, and to put a little more flesh on that, if you know nothing about Ashley Wolthuis, very accomplished appraiser as well, and there are changes to the appraisal world. And so, man, from invited guests, from lending and how to structure deals to meet underwriting needs, to contracts, to appraisals, you guys, I say it, I hope you believe it, and I hope you go into these meetings with a high level of confidence. That doesn't mean you have everything answered, but knowing you're with a company that does have those answers and those resources, and you can outshine just about anybody. I'll take a quick segue, and then I want to get to the buyer broker agreement, because that's where we're heading after the ERS real quick. We're meeting with a company, a pretty well-established company, several of their agents who aren't being trained well. And a lot of the questions, and you think, oh my gosh, you pay how much in fees? I mean, it's substantial, and you're not getting training, and you're getting documents forced on you with an out-of-state flair to them, and what's going to happen when you interact with other brokerages. And you know what? Listen, I applaud them that they're working on getting stuff done, but I look at what we're doing and how far ahead of the curve we're doing, and trying to communicate and show you that this is navigable, and giving you flexibility, right? Flexibility is so important in deal making. And so the last thing we wanted to do is just give you a restriction of this is the way you're going to do it, and don't gripe and complain about it, right?
I mean, you look at EXP and the way EXP is going about this, and not to single out a particular brokerage, but they are not allowing buyer broker compensation to be part of their listing agreements. And so in talking with some of the EXP agents, they are still having the conversation with their sellers, and they're going to have to navigate how to incorporate talks with compensation. Like they're having their leadership talk as though they're in a different planet, but in actuality, when they're going to go be a practitioner, they have to have an entirely different discussion with their clientele. So,
Yeah,
again, have local leadership that knows how this is going to happen, boots on the ground in Utah is just so important.
And I want Andy's
Sorry.
question. I want Andy's question here in a second, but I want to just follow up on that real quick because I've heard some people ding on EXP, and we all have some good friends at EXP. It's they're trying to navigate this just like anybody else. And here's the thing. They're going to be able to navigate this. Let's just start there. They will use the brokerage compensation agreement religiously, I promise you, because that's going to be the way they get compensation, or the REPC. But everybody, just be careful we don't ding on, other people who are they're trying, but I think they're creating unnecessary challenges, right? Instead of this wave is washing over everybody, let's embrace it and figure out how to make it, as flexible as possible for us. And more importantly, let's make sure we understand how to talk about it. That before the national settlement, this was the problem. It's been the problem for decades. We're not, as the industry in general, we're not proficient in how we explain things. We don't target trying to set people at ease. We get technical and we kind of dig our heels in on things, and as a result, we don't do a great job. Andy, and then was it you, Don? Did you have a comment?
I have one too, after Andy and Don and whoever else.
Okay.
How would you suggest we approach limited agency double-ending deal for the buyer's side of the commission? How do we go about that?
Can I do that as an extension of talking about the buyer agreement?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Don, did you have a comment?
I did not.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, that was me. Sorry.
I was trying to
John.
ignore you, Parker, so I'm going to go with Giselle.
Okay, fair enough.
Trumped you, Parker. I'm not a huge fan of doing like role playing, but in this scenario, I feel like something that might be helpful, and I'm happy to like sit down and mastermind with somebody about, I think it might be helpful if we have something like written out that just says, okay, maybe this is like what a conversation could look like. So kind of a script, just something that maybe all of us could practice and just say, okay, if this question comes up, this could possibly be your answer. So that's something that I think for me would be super helpful to have, just even if it's like role playing is one thing, but I think having something to read over and over and just be like, oh yeah, that could be the answer here. So if Matt, if you have time, or Dan or anybody, I think any of us would love to have that, just to see kind of like some type of a script that talks about the new, like Parker was asking, how are you going to have this conversation? Maybe we can summarize it into something that's really simple, really something easy to digest, and we can all practice and just become better at that and explaining with the seller. That's just something that I was thinking through in my mind that will be helpful for everybody.
I'm actually so glad you brought that up. I've actually Wolf Hewis brought this up. I think all of us as an industry, listen, we're all grown adults, and I don't know what it is. I've dealt with this for literally years with certain agents. They're like, yes, I absolutely want to practice, call it role play, whatever you want to call it, or scripts versus an outline, or whatever. I don't care what the terms are. We all know what the concepts are. And there's just some people that are truly what I think it is. And so I'm glad to hear you say that, Giselle. I think it's fear, right? I don't want to be up in front of my peers and actually have to spew my approach and be critiqued and whatever. But oh my gosh, I look at everybody on this call and there's nobody mean outside of Dan.
There you go. We will be doing some workshopping and role playing tomorrow, right? Like how to like talk to your clients, and especially about some of these new forms. And Matt, I'd love to hear some more dialogue from you as we get into the buyer broker side of like the in contemplation form, and how, if that's necessary for our brokerage to do.
Yeah. Listen.
Hey, Dan, what's the time, place, and link?
11 o'clock tomorrow, and it's
on the calendar, isn't it?
It's on the calendar, and I thought I saw an email as well, but there'll be an email coming out today for sure.
I'll just give me a chance for a shameless plug.
Yeah.
Hey, before that, I know the Moffett group is having a meeting in PG from 9 to 11 where Matt is actually going to be helping us with this, and we're going to be doing some role playing. So if anybody wants to come to the PG office and sit down with us, we're all learning this together.
Yeah, this is what I love. I don't love unnecessary meetings. Anybody who knows me knows that's the case, but I really love it when pros can get together and collaborate and figure things out. And you know what? I have my own style. It doesn't work for everybody. I've never had any dreams that it would, nor did I want it to, but I hope by just like on these calls, I give some suggested dialogues. I hope it gets your wheels spinning, like in your own language, in your own personality, but at least gives you a framework. I think this is kind of what you're talking about, Giselle, right? Like there's better ways to say things. There's a better flow, a sequencing that's going to make sense for most people. And the exercise of practicing that, and it's not like you have to go do hours and hours of practice. I think do some practice, have some critique, write some notes, and then go practice it yourself, right? And then come back at a later time and see how much you've advanced. That is a truly valuable exercise. And I've heard it said by others in the past, all of us, and I mean all of us, we're scripted. I'm sorry. I dare anybody to challenge me that you're not scripted. Think of your kids, think of your wife, think of your business contacts, think of how you order food, think of how it's all based on there's a better way to do it. There's a more efficient way to do it. There's a more effective way to do it. And we all become scripted. So if the word script scares you, just substitute it with a word like outline. If that makes it softer for you and is not quite abrasive, right? Jared, let me ask you a question. Jared Gish, do you ever practice what you're saying to clients?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Why?
More often than I would say is recommended by most. Our team is constantly doing that.
Yeah. And it's not because you have nothing else to do, but you guys close a lot of transactions, I would dare say, because you're pretty polished in your approach. There's things maybe to steer clear of, right? Saying certain things is going to lead you down a path that maybe you don't want to go. Or conversely, you say certain things that are going to lead you exactly where you want to go.
Absolutely.
And that it doesn't happen on the fly. I'm sorry. It just doesn't happen none of us are that good. So thanks for bringing that up, Giselle. Let's talk briefly about the buyer broker agreement. A lot of you have been affiliated with me for a long time, so we've had these conversations kind of like, Matt, what's the big deal? You've been talking about the value of the buyer broker for years. And it's true, but yet we have a new opportunity and frankly, a new additional reason to get a person to sign a buyer broker agreement. What is that reason?
Have to.
So we can frickin' get paid.
I can't show you a property until I have something in writing. That's no longer just a DRE rule. It's part of the NAR settlement. Let me connect the dots for you. If you show a property, and trust me, this sequence has happened prior to the settlement. And all the office managers are going to laugh when I say this because they know it's true. A REPC submitted, executed, and then comes the buyer broker agreement a day or two later. You know what the challenge is with the new settlement with that particular configuration? The agent's going to be paid zero. They're going to be paid zero. You can only be paid what's in your agency agreement and not more than that when the contract is written and executed. So if you bring your buyer broker 2 days later, what was the amount of commission you were owed at the time the REPC was written? Oh, zero. There was nothing. That's how much you can be paid.
You might want to make sure to put that on like the weekly bulletin for the next
Yeah,
months.
you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, we may do that as today's broker minute or two. And I promise you, most people are fast learners when they walk away from $10, $12, $15,000. It's sad when they have to learn that lesson twice, but there will be a few. But we have the company, myself personally.
Where are we, Max?
What's that? Well, anyway, I can't. So for instance, a lot of the questions have been, well, how is the other side ever going to know what our buyer broker agreement is? Well, our office managers have a 3-day free close audit of our files. And they're going to look at the buyer broker agreement and they're going to compare it to what is on the settlement statement. And if what's on the settlement statement is more than what's in the buyer broker agreement, guess who gets flagged right away? This guy. And we get to have an uncomfortable conversation, be like, hey, sorry, you're not getting paid as much as you thought you were getting paid. Okay. So I promise you, the infrastructure will be in place to make sure that we know those things. Don?
Is there a place in SkySlope to put that buyer agency agreement before you have a property identified?
Savannah, would you like to answer that question?
I'll answer it. So if obviously so Dawn, this is perfect for you. And if anyone else didn't know, so SkySlope actually just made a change where you can create a file now for a buyer with all of your buyer broker documents prior to going under contract with a REPC. So it's the best way to submit it so that you at least have something ready to go. And then when it does go under contract, you can mark it as accepted contract. The office managers are being trained on this. I know that there's some training on SkySlope as well. So if you guys need any help there, just reach out to them or me, of course, or anyone. But it's all there. And I think that's such an amazing change that they've made prior to all of this happening. So
it's super slick. If I were to restate it, they took, so the general framework of SkySlope, let's say 6 months ago, was you had listings and then you had listings that went under contract. That's kind of how their structure was set up. And we had been complaining for quite some time, being like, yeah, that doesn't work because we're supposed to get buyer broker agreements when they're executed. And there's not a real simple way to do that. Well, fast forward the national settlement, and all of a sudden there's enough need behind, what the request is. And miraculously, they now have taken, quote unquote, the transaction and made a light version of it. Doesn't have all the fields, but has the basic fields, and that's where we put our buyers. And then there's literally a button when it goes under contract, and you click the button, and all the other fields that are pertinent to a transaction now are populated. So it'll be pretty straightforward. Savannah, did you also have a question, or were you just going to chime in with that?
it was chiming in with that because I felt like it was a good ducktail for everyone, just in case people didn't know.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So let me go to I want to make sure I stay on task with this. The question was asked about limited agency. So, well, first of all, buyer broker agreement. I hope we have the dialogue. Parker, I'm going to use you as an example. Yeah. Well, I don't know, Matt. I don't know. You look kind of sketchy with that beard and everything. I don't know if I trust working with you. All right. I'm going to rapid fire in no particular order the things that I would hope all of you consider saying. Hey, appreciate the concern, Parker. If I saw myself, I would think the same thing. Nobody got that. You're supposed to restate and confirm. I was doing it in a very funny way and nobody even laughed. Okay, so of course we're going to acknowledge whatever the concern is, right? But here's your flexibility. Hey, just so you know, with the national settlement, and it's actually the law in the state of Utah that some people just ignored in the past, which created some risk for their clients. We weren't a company that did that, but the national settlement with the DOJ and the real estate industry has now made it a very specific requirement. They have quite literally come out and said, we can't even show a client, a prospective client, the public, a house without a written agreement. Are we good so far? So all of a sudden, the national settlement, the DRE, everybody else is the bad guy. I can't do it. My hands are tied. Okay. But really quickly, without even taking a deep breath, maybe not a breath at all, I'm going to jump into the good news is, right? You see there's a commonality of some of the things I use. The good news is, Don, we have so much flexibility with a buyer broker agreement. I don't think you're going to have a problem signing it. That's called the assumptive close, right? And I'm going to be like, so we can make it here as long or as short as you want. We can make it for a particular city or county. We can make it for just a single house. We can make it for a single day. But at the end of the day, if you want me to show you that house you just called about that looks like it's going to go pretty quickly, I'm going to have something in writing. Fair enough.
So Matt,
Parker, at least acknowledge that was pretty good.
that was darn
Thanks.
good, Matt.
Thanks, Brandon. Hope your workout's
Noted.
going well. We can see you huffing and puffing. It's awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say Brandon's not going to have that problem when someone says, "Oh, I don't like the way you look," because Brandon's going to know he looks good. So, all right. So, here's a for instance, right? So last Friday, showing some properties in Camas, got a call from a new buyer who wanted to look at a property in Camas, and we scheduled the appointment. And then I said, "Hey, I'm going to go ahead and send you over a buyer broker agreement to have you sign." State requires now that every agent have some sort of agreement signed with the buyer before we walk you through a property, just so that we can protect your interests. Well, I didn't know about that rule. Well, okay, well that's okay. A lot of people don't. It's a new rule. Well, I already signed something with a real estate agent. Okay, so this is how the conversation went, as opposed to the way you just did it. Oh, you did? Great. And what area is that for? Oh, I think it's for like all of, or I think you said, oh, I think it's for like all of Park City and Heber. And I said, great. So does that cover Camas? And he goes, yes, it does. And I said, how long is that agreement for? And he said, I don't really know, but I know that she has to be my real estate agent for the next 2 months. So then the conversation went to, well, look, unfortunately, my recommendation is you give her a call if you want to take a look at this property, since you already have an agreement signed with her. If anything changes, feel free to reach out to me. Clearly, I'm advantageous in working for you and doing it the right way. And just kind of left it at that. I kind of blew it in the fact that I guess I could have expanded that area and said, hey, look, there's a lot of flexibility to this contract, just like the verbiage you used. Are you only looking in Camas? Are you looking in other areas? But I didn't even think about that. I just thought he's locked in. That's it. It's done. So what you are saying is there really is an opportunity to work with somebody while another real estate agent is working with them in a different area. And then it comes down to a question of who's providing the best representation or the most value in that service.
Yeah. So a couple of things, and this is why a situation like this is good in role play, because you can talk about that situation like coulda, woulda, shouldas. Now, those are never comfortable because it means there's a missed opportunity. The good news is you might not repeat it in the future. And so, and I know you're giving us a Reader's Digest version, but before we ever get to that place where we make a statement, let's just call it the tougher part of a conversation. Like I need you to sign this in order for me to show you home, right? That's not exactly a super palatable portion to talk with people about. Any good coaches out there will tell you, what do you have to build before you hit a tough topic? You have to build a relationship. You have to build rapport. And one of the best ways to do that is by asking questions. So in a situation where somebody's saying, oh, I think I've signed something with somebody else, right? You don't have to be disingenuous and be like, oh, good for you. That's so great. Good job, right? But you also don't want to make them feel bad about it. Like, hey, you know what, Parker, that happens. That happens from time to time. And, it's just a course of doing business. Let me ask you a couple questions. Do you know how long that agreement was for? Do you know, did it cover Camas or was it just for Park City? Was it Summit County versus Wasatch County? Right, just start asking some questions, which is starting to increase their value. Oh, this guy actually knows what he's doing. You're asking the right questions. I didn't even think about it. And oh, by the way, how many buyers know exactly what they signed? That's right, Brandon. 00. Very rare, if ever. And they're going to be like, I don't know. So then the questions could be, and again, this isn't the path, it's just options. Hey, listen, in fairness, would you be willing to get a copy of that buyer broker agreement and just send me a copy to see if there is an opportunity for us to work and I can get you in that house today? And if not, we can figure out if it makes sense based on what me and the Logan Moffett team can do for our buyers, which frankly is a lot more than a lot of agents. Love to sit down and talk with you about what we could do, in a month when this expires.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
I really like saying, especially when it comes to new documents and new rules and new ways of doing things, especially when the clients or the potential buyer or seller doesn't know what's happening. When they sign an agreement like this, like you guys were just saying, they often don't know exactly what they signed.
Yep.
And my favorite response is to say, that's okay, because it puts them in a position of, okay, I didn't mess up. I didn't, that's okay.
Right.
Let's talk more about it. Let's look into it. And let me ask you a couple of questions about it. Do you have a copy there? Can we, look at it? Is it for this area? Is it for this time period? That's okay, because it could be for 2 months, and that's fine. But let's talk about where it's at and what we can include and what you're looking for.
Thanks, Mike. Great points. And here's what I'd say too. If they largely don't remember what they signed, can you imagine if you get a copy and it says, oh, this covers 123 Main Street? Fair game. Doors wide open. We're not showing you 123 Main Street, but sometimes we make assumptions that they know what they're talking about, that they know what they signed up for, when in reality they probably don't, and we might shut the conversation off shorter than it need be. Make sense?
So on that, then let's say they signed an agreement specifically for 123 Main Street in Camas, and I just put Camas. Do I need to exclude that property?
So if you look at that buyer broker agreement, right? If you look at the section where, I'm turning to mine real quickly here. By checking the box below, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
Right. By unless checked below, the buyer warrants that they don't have an agreement. That's really what it's saying. I'm giving you the simple version because there's tends to jack it up. But if it is checked, that means there is an agreement. And that's why in the red comments I put, so a good agent would ask for it, determine whether it's property specific, date specific, county specific, and figure out if there's a way for us to work together either now or in the near future. Right. And I mean, here's just another option. So great, they're looking in Camas, Parker, right? If it was for a long period of time and it covered, the entire county, what's wrong with saying, hey, have you considered things down in Utah County, Davis County? There's
Right.
some sweet properties up in Summit Creek. If you want representation there, you're still free to, make it okay for them. You're still free to work with Savannah. She's awesome. I've done some deals with her in the past. But I would love to be your representation down here if something hits your interest. Now, they may say, cross that bridge when we come to it, but at least you planted the seed that they know that if they do end up looking, right, because their needs change or the prices are too high up in Camas or whatever, this is all about, furthering the ball, pushing the ball further down the field, right? So a lot of options. Yes,
Matt.
Shelley.
So I guess because my brain's kind of wrapping around all of this, I'm realizing that this is going to be a shit show. I'm on the grievance committee.
Yep.
And I can see that there's going to be buyers out there that have multiple buyer broker agreements. I can see all kinds of litigation happening, and it's a little terrifying. I think that, I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of people. This just is making things so much more complicated. We have to be so careful about even asking to see their other buyer broker agreements. Is that
why? I'm not trying to argue with you. You're not breaking any rule or anything like that by asking. Do they have to share it with you? No. But there's so many things that weave in here. And let me just say before I get into this, I appreciate your honesty. And I think there's an element of caution, but I hope we don't go to a place of fear, right? There are provisions and safety nets in the document, right? So even just like our old buyer broker agreement, when things would come to a grievance committee, and if it passed the grievance committee and went to a code of ethics hearing or an arbitration, there's a lot of weight, even in the old document, that said, hey, by the buyer signing this, they're affirming that they don't have another agency agreement. Now, that language is in here and it's even more detailed. So if you follow that and again, don't rely on phone conversations. If you have a phone conversation, say, hey, I'm just going to shoot you a text, kind of recapturing what we just talked about so we remember, right? That's going to be a good practice for this environment you're talking about, Giselle.
Isn't Utah a one-party recording state?
It is, but
So
most people don't have the technology on their phone to actually record phone conversations. So, and sometimes it doesn't, the technology is a little sketchy. So I wouldn't rely on that wholeheartedly, Parker. It's a nice additional layer, but all I would say is this. So Giselle, you and I, we're going to role play. She turns off her video. Oh my gosh.
I will role play. What do you want?
Hey, she's acting like a true client, isn't she? Okay, so listen, if you and I have done, we're having our initial consultation as a buyer and a buyer's agent and a buyer. And I explain the new lay of the land. And I get to the question like, hey, listen, Giselle, I've done this for 23 years. I really do value our community of real estate professionals. I've got a good reputation, and that really helps when I negotiate on your behalf. So I want to make sure, first and foremost, I'm not stepping on any toes. Have you signed any other agency agreements with any other buyers brokerages?
Well, I looked at a house like, a month ago with somebody, and I think I signed something like on top of the roof of their car.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it happens that way. We try and make sure people understand more clearly what they're signing. But listen, in that vein, do you remember who the agent was? Because I'd love to just make a quick call and make sure I'm not stepping on their toes and putting us in an unnecessary situation.
It was whoever listed the house, so I have no idea.
Okay, and I'm going to go down this path and exhaust it until it's a hard no. I can't get the data. Do you remember what brokerage it was? Right, and I'm going to call their broker, and I'm going to have your name, and I'm going to talk to the broker and be like, hey, I'm working with Giselle Secreton. She thinks she might have signed an agency agreement. You guys do a good book of business. We always love doing deals with you. Can you just check your database and make sure there's not an agency agreement? Now, remember, this is a phone conversation. When I'm done and the broker says, no, I don't think we have anything, say, fantastic. I'm just going to shoot a little text or an email memorializing. Maybe don't use the word memorialize, recounting that we had this conversation. Right. That kind of puts them on notice. Don't come back after me later and say, oh, we actually did have an agency agreement. Right. And so at that point, then I can go back to Giselle and be like, hey, you know what? I talked to Dan. He's the broker, and he says that they don't have a record of anything. So it looks like I'm free to work with you. Now, from a grievance committee, a code of ethics, the Division of Real Estate says you're not to interfere with an exclusive agency relationship where you know it exists or should have known it exists. What I just demonstrated on that brief little dialogue, did I jump the hurdles? Is the state going to come after me? No, I proactively reached out, I documented it, and they told me there was nothing. If later on something surfaces and there is one, I mean, we were involved in one not too long ago where there was agency in place, and it went for 9-10 months, right, Dan? And they then resurfaced their agency agreement, and there's all kinds of things that weave into that. When you sign up at somebody's agent, there is the anticipation, the expectation that you are going to work actively on their behalf, not tie them to a document and then sit on your arse and wait until somebody else does the work and come back and claim commissions, right? And loosely, that falls under the category of abandonment. You don't get to claim that you're their agent if you're not really working as their agent. You have abandoned them. And some brokers will tell you, oh, that's only an arbitration hearing term. No, it isn't. The DRE uses it all the time to say your agency isn't worth squat because you weren't working actively on their behalf. So coming full circle, do your job on this, ask the question, and you're right, Giselle. And this is by design. This is what the DOJ wanted. They wanted the buyers to have, and it doesn't matter if it messes up our life a little and makes it a little messier. They wanted the buyers to have multiple options, and they wanted negotiation power. As a result, they can now sign an agreement with me in Utah County and Don in Weber, North Davis, and Clint in Salt Lake. And yes, we have to track those down and verify we're not stepping on each other's toes. Unfortunate, but can actually be pretty cool when the rest of everybody else doesn't know how to navigate this. Yeah, Mike.
What? Oh, sorry. Go
If
ahead,
someone
Mike.
has signed a if someone signed a deal for Camas to view homes in Camas, we can still sign a deal with them to view homes in the county, and avoid Camas, or what's
Yeah,
the?
so for
what's the-
instance, what is Camas? Is that Wasatch or Summit? I don't know.
I don't know.
I think it's
Wasatch.
Wasatch, but I'm
I
not
think it's
sure.
Wasatch.
Let's assume it's let's
But
just
I-
assume it's Wasatch. If I can sign an agreement with them that says I have now we've established they have an agreement for the city of Camas with somebody else. And so you'd say in section 1.2.
It's Summit, Matt, just so you know.
Thank you, Parker. Okay, so in 1.2, we would check the box located only within Summit County, barring Camas, the city of Camas. Can we do that all day long? Is that easy to read for just about anybody? Yes. Any other city in Summit County, but not Camas. And is it enforceable? Yes. Okay. I'm going to finish with a interesting one that somebody sent me a photo. I'm trying to remember who it was. Oh, it was Erin Menard. She said, "Hey, can our agents do this?" And it was from a Remax somewhere else. And down at the bottom, like a sign writer underneath your sign, it said, "Seller offering 3% cooperative compensation." Can they do that?
Yeah, it's not in the MLS,
It's not in the MLS.
so they can do that.
And they're not creating a database on other people's data and sharing that and publishing it, and right? Yeah, this is the equivalent of us sending out kind of to everybody who is remotely interested in the house that yes, we already have a pre-signed brokerage compensation agreement. Now, listen, I say that with a huge grain of salt. It is not the same thing. It's an advertisement saying they're paying 3%. You still need to get a buyer's agency agreement, or a buyer's brokerage compensation agreement. Why?
It's not legally binding. Just an advertisement. It's not legally
Not
binding.
just
Burger King does lots of advertisements. Their burgers are not the same as they look on the advertisement. So
okay, we'll roll with that. But remember, in the agreement, it says that it must be in writing. Otherwise, the seller in 2.2, the seller is not obligated to pay it. Now, some people will be like, "Oh, well, it was on a sign writer. That's in writing." No, it requires a signature. So unless they have their signature and your signature on their sign writer, it's probably not going to pass muster. So I think this.
CYA.
Yes. What's that, Mike?
CYA.
Yes. Cover your assets. Yeah. So we're going to run into more of these situations. I will try and communicate them as they come across. We will have a component of this. So this was a one-off contracts and negotiations class today. This is not on the normal schedule. We will have a portion of the standard contracts and negotiations, not the whole thing, but a portion of it dedicated to new things that have cropped up, how to address it, possible dialogues, for the foreseeable future until all of us just feel warm and cozy with the new lay of the land, right? I hope as we have these discussions, you see there really is a way for, or let me restate that. There are a number of ways to navigate this. And I'll finish with Jachelle's comment. Doesn't matter if you understand them, right? Unless you practice them and can get them to come out of your mouth in a meaningful, persuasive way, a comforting way, then it doesn't really matter how much we know, right? Because our clients are still going to be resistant and we won't increase our book of business. And that really, really, really is my hope. I know it's Ron's hope, it's Daryl's hope. When there's change, it affords opportunity, and we've already demonstrated that we're spinning up at a faster rate than most of our competitors. So let's do the additional step get practiced in our dialogues, and go capture on average those 4 transactions that the average agent is going to lose over the next 12 months. That's 50K on average. Let's go get it. Okay. Thanks for being on the call. Have a great Monday, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, see ya.